tropical soda apple. Probably the time of year that we're doing the survey, this is probably more what the tropical soda apple might look like. Probably won't have the fruits unless it's a plant that we missed from last year. And if we missed it from last year, it would be about 6 feet tall and would have yellow berries on it instead of the watermelon shaped berries, colored berries that we were seeing on the previous photograph. And then we have one other plant that we need to keep watch for while we're doing the Cogongrass survey, and that is giant salvinia. And giant salvinia is found only in water, so it's fairly easy to identify. If you have a hand lens, you can look at the leaf, and the surface of the leaf will look like it's covered with little tiny egg beaters. And it's a floating fern, and it can form a mat 2 feet thick in the water. And I've heard that some golfers that in other states where they hit golf balls into salvinia infestations, that the golf ball will actually bounce on the salvinia. It's so thick and so dense. So what we need in South Carolina, we need eyes. We need your eyes out there. We need you to tell us what you see. And if you see something that doesn't look right, call us and let us know. We'll check it out. We've got inspectors across the state that would be glad to come and take a look. And that's the end of that part. But I do have one thing that I want to, I got an email this morning, and I thought that this was kind of interesting. This was from Gene Everett, and it says, I truly believe that the only way that we'll be able to control Cogongrass in South Carolina is to make the general public so aware that they look constantly for new populations. People need to know to report Cogongrass the same way that they would report a wildfire or a crime or a traffic accident, and that our survey is a good way to get started on that. I thank Jean for her support and for her. She's done a lot of survey and looking around in her area, and she reported that infestation in the Francis Marion Forest. And we appreciate what she's done in our fight to identify sites in South Carolina. And that's it for this one.
We're going to continue on here in just a moment. Steve's going to get prepared and be talking a little bit more about grasses and the common characteristics that we have as far as the different grasses and how you can tell Cogongrass as opposed to these other grasses. You know, we have a lot of interest and activity in certain components of the state, but we never can have enough people really helping and looking for the grass. We had a question that came in here just a minute ago as far as whether we were using game wardens in this program, and the only comment I could make is the DNR has indicated they will be part of our efforts, and I guess we need to talk to them about maybe having game wardens involved, because they're certainly out on the land and they get to see a lot of activity, and they would be very helpful in helping. Fact is, I can't think of any group of people that wouldn't be helpful. So spread this around among your friends, get them involved, and we'll be telling you later on how they can sign up on the website to become part of the Cogongrass survey. Steve, let's hear about the grasses.
Okay. George, just briefly, I know Patrick went over some of the lookalikes, but I have some other ones, and I based the ones that I picked. This is not a big long list, but constantly we get calls into our department about people who want to report Cogongrass. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. I'd say 90% of the calls that we get have been false alarms. Some people have found the stands that we already knew about, but just briefly want to run through a few that are sort of look-alike plants. And as you're looking at the grasses out there, sometimes it can be very confusing, because if you look and it's not in flower, it's very hard to tell these grasses apart. And it might be easier for Patrick, but it's not for me. And if you want to study up on grasses and the parts, I recommend this book right here. This is one that I use to study by, and it's How to Identify Grass-Like Plants by H.D. Harrington. And this is an excellent book, and it talks about all those little parts and spikelets and hairs, and gives you a good background information on the type of grasses and their parts, if you're really interested and you want to get into the complicated end of identifying grasses. I found that they're very difficult taxonomically to identify. What are some of the grasses that look like Cogongrass? Well, one of the first ones that I can think of that if someone asked me to describe to them what Cogongrass looked like and they'd never seen it, I tell them that it looks like a miniature pampas grass. And almost everyone knows pampas grass because it's grown as an ornamental plant. But if you look at this photo that I made right outside the DPI offices, this looks a lot like that grass that we were looking at in the Francis Marion Forest. But in fact, this is pampas grass. One of the main differences is the flowering time, and we found that in a lot of the lookalikes. Many of the lookalike plants flower in late summer or in the fall, and one good thing about Cogongrass is that it tends to bloom May, and that's the reason we're having our survey in May. And between the 1st of May and the end of May is the most Cogongrass, and if it's in the state, which we hope we don't have it, but we need to know where those spots are. If it is, that we're going to be looking during that time when that seed heads out, and that makes it, like Patrick said, almost impossible to miss. I'm showing you this slide again because I want to make the point about the fact that the offset midrib is not always a characteristic that will determine what grass you have. So you need to look at all those factors: the rhizome, you need to look at the leaf, and you need to look at the seed head. And it tends to bunch from the base instead of growing up and having stems on it. So just keep that in mind. Just because it has an offset midrib, that does make it suspect, but that doesn't mean that it is Cogongrass. One plant in particular that I get lots of calls, people call me and they say, "Oh, I know I found Cogongrass." And then when I get there, this does look a lot like those photographs that we're looking at again. This is Miscanthus, and if you look at it very closely, you will see that it tends to have an offset midrib, and it has that same shape that Cogongrass has. So not always is that going to give you the identifying clue that you need. Now if you look at the seed head, they don't really look anything alike, but since the Miscanthus blooms later, still people, when they see the plant, they confuse it with what they think might be Cogongrass. There's a close-up of the seed head. Doesn't look anything like the Cogongrass. Another one that we get lots of calls on is Johnson grass. Most everyone knows what Johnson grass is, but they see it, and people that don't know a lot about grasses or haven't been in farming where it's a particular pest in farming in our part of the country, then they might pull it up and see those rhizomes or stolons on it and think that they may have found Cogongrass just because of the root system. Again, its flowering time is different, and the flower looks nothing like it, and it looks like the midrib might be a little offset in that leaf there. So beware that there are other things out there. One thing that we don't want to do is the thing about the fluffy seed heads. We want to make sure that people understand that this is a grass. And a lot of the calls that I've got in the past have not even been grasses. So make sure that you know the difference between grass and a broadleaf plant. Last year we had a newspaper that published that it had dandelion-like seed, and dandelion-like seed caused us to have hundreds of telephone calls because trampweed, which is not a grass, was blooming, and white seeds were blowing everywhere. It was